dug up some history of this fellow who had come earlier. But he didn't have, obviously he didn't have much success, but he did start something. But Vivekananda, he was, whether he was the first or not, he was by far the most influential. He made a huge splash in that Chicago. It was a Chicago meeting of religions or something like that. And people went back, to where they come from, California, New York, wherever it was. And they wanted to read the books, and they started, an interest in yoga and all of these things. And he, of course, that was Ramakrishna. He was a disciple of Ramakrishna. And that's why the Ramakrishna Mission, or the Vedanta Society in LA, it's known as, they've been there for years. When I started getting interested in yoga in New York in '72, that's why I went. I came this close to take initiation there. Krishna saved me. I'll tell you the story someday. But they had a really nice establishment on the Upper East Side of New York, which is where, even in those days, it was very expensive. Now it's just ridiculous. But it's a very nice place. You go to hear you give a Gita class in the evening, and you sit like in a movie theater, very nice, comfortable seats. Nobody's sitting on the floor like this. You like it. And then he would give this. It was a young guy. It was the one who came after Nikolananda, who Prabhupada met. There's a story of the uptown swamis who tried to get Prabhupada to, you can't wear the clothes, don't insist on the 4 legs, like that. Prabhupada was adamant, So when I saw him, this Nikolananda, this was '72, he'd already had a stroke. That was probably been in '66, and then this was '72, so it was 6 years later. But his successor had come from India. They had a lot of people in India. He hadn't been trained in he does some yoga in the Himalayas and everything. This guy had some mystic powers. First of all, he was a very eloquent speaker on the Gita. And even though it was Mayavad, basically the basic philosophy was there. But he told me what, the kind of job I had and everything. And I was totally impressed with that. I didn't tell him. He was reading my mind,
Wow.
And so I got totally, wow, so. But luckily, I was ready. He wanted me as a disciple, but I saved. I'll tell you that story some other day.
Prabhu, can I ask?
Yeah.
Those, the first canto that you have?
Yeah.
Were those actually in Prabhupada's trunk that he brought with him, or?
I'm not sure if they had any other trunks that were sent over afterward, but they could have been. There was certainly the one and only printing that he did. Could have been, maybe carried over.
Wow.
I got it, I stole it when I was in LA, the BBT. There was a drawer, I said, I'm taking these. There it is. All right, text 14. Matra sparshastu konteya shitoshna sukadukada agama payino nityas tam tatiksha subharta. O son of Kunti, the non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress and their disappearance in due course are like the appearance and disappearance of winter and summer seasons. They arise from sense perception, O Sayan of Bharat, and one must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. Just an editorial note. You may not know what Sayan means. It means descendant. That word appears again and again.
How do you spell that?
S-C-I-O-N. Straight word. It's not such a common word. Purport. In the proper discharge of duty, one has to learn to tolerate non-permanent appearances and disappearances of happiness and distress. According to Vedic injunction, one has to take a bath early in the morning, even during the month of Magh, January, February. It is very cold at that time, but in spite of that, a man who abides by the religious principles does not hesitate to take his bath. Similarly, a woman does not hesitate to cook in the kitchen in the months of May and June, the hottest part of the summer season. One has to execute his duty in spite of climatic and inconveniences. Similarly, to fight is the religious principle of the Kshatriyas. And although one has to fight with some friend or relative, one should not deviate from his prescribed duty. One has to follow the prescribed rules and regulations of religious principles in order to rise up to the platform of knowledge, because by knowledge and devotion only can one liberate himself from the clutches of Maya or illusion. The two different names of address given to Arjuna are also significant. To address him as Kaunteya signifies his great blood relations from his mother's side. Kaunteya means son of Kunti. And to address him as Bharata signifies his greatness from his father's side. From both sides, he is supposed to have a great heritage. A great heritage brings responsibility in the matter of proper discharge of duties. Therefore, he cannot avoid fighting. But he's trying to avoid fighting. That's the point. So here's another verse that just had. So I remember memorizing this verse. It was freezing cold. I was walking to the press. We had a press in Brooklyn, which was like a block or two away from the temple. We had the Tiffany place. And it's winter. I joined in March. It's winter time. In Brooklyn, it's freezing cold in New York. And I'm walking over there and I'm chanting this verse. Sheet ocean. Sheet is cold. Sheet ocean is I still remember to this day we're on Harinam in Battery Park, which is behind the New York Library on 42nd Street. And it was super cold. It was so cold I had the sweatshirt. And I'm holding it like this so the wind won't get in there chanting Hare Krishna. But that was really a blessing, because you remember these austere, So Matra Sparsha. Now Shita Ushna Sukha Dukkada. Shita means really cold, winter or summer, happiness and distress. Now one may ask, well, why do we have to learn to tolerate happiness? I'm good at that. That part I've got 50%. The point is that there are two things that happen in the material energy, right? There's the dualities, the happiness and distress. So when you're trying to be equipoise, you have to tolerate both of them. Tolerate the allurements to try to enjoy this material energy, or to become always as comfortable as possible. In other words, that becomes your main concern, right? As well as the obvious toleration, which Prabhupada talks about, of suffering, of pains. That's the whole idea in Krishna consciousness is to come to this point of goodness and then pure goodness where your mind is equipoised. You read through the Bhagavad Gita. What are the symptoms of someone who's, this is at the end of the 14th chapter. What are the symptoms of one who has transcended the modes of nature? Right? Tulya. There's one word you can remember. Tulya. Tulya means equipoised. In insult and praise. Right? In other words, we generally go for the praise and we get either depressed or angry at the insult. That's natural. But if you can be equipoised, someone has insulted me, they did this regarding my external body, they don't know who I really am. In other words, they're on the bodily concept of life. But if you're identifying with the body, then you take umbrage, he said, an umbrage at any slight. You can tell someone's totally in the mode of ignorance when they're very quick to be insulted, such as our glorious president-elect. I shall not sully these courts. Any little insult, and he's like, he's got the mentality of a 16-year-old or 14-year-old. But isn't that? Or you go, right? If you go to certain parts of this city, every city has, a place where the gangs. Okay, so you don't look them in the eye. You're on their turf, right? Anything they're ready to take. Okay, so that's the mode of ignorance, right? But the mode of goodness and pure goodness means you tolerate anything. Just look at Prahlad or any great devotees. They don't get disturbed by the things that happen just by nature. Right? It always begins with the physical things as the first stage of titiksha, which is tolerance, right? Tam titiksha svabhava. Cold and heat, right? In other words, yes, you tolerate because you take precaution, but you do your duty anyway. The point is to do your duty, even though the difficult circumstance. That's what probably makes the point. That's the sign of tolerance. But a greater tolerance, it always comes up in the Bible. The greater tolerance is one who can tolerate insult, especially from someone who is dear to them, right? Some family member. It's like arrows in your heart. Right? Somebody you thought loved you now suddenly insults you. Right? That also has to be tolerated. That's what Arjuna is dealing with here. The people who he loved, it's difficult. I can't imagine killing anybody ever. But the thing is, this is what the Kshatriyas do. They're trained for that. But this is beyond the pale. He's not afraid of getting killed. He's afraid of the horror of killing someone who he loves. But that's exactly what he has to tolerate if he's going to do his duty and do the right thing and do what Krishna wants. This is the demands of bhakti. Now the main thing you have to tolerate, it's not so much the physical, it's the mental and it's the emotional. So that, the idea, in the Bible, right, it says that this too shall pass, right? That's a call to tolerance. Yes, it's difficult, pain, but this will also pass. But we have to go on the other side also. This allurement for pleasure, this too shall pass. Don't go for it. If you can't avoid the allurements for enjoyment, you won't be able to tolerate the difficulties. They work together. There's two sides of the same coin. Okay? So, undertaking some difficult thing for Krishna, this takes you out of the modes of nature. Because you realize, yes, if I just keep chanting, as the famous saint Jayananda said, in Krishna consciousness, things don't always go right all the time. You have to keep chanting. Right? And Krishna gives you a realization, yeah, I can get through this. I can get through this. We went through this. Now you've reached another level of tolerance. And the book distributors know this. You have to tolerate it. But you get strong that way. How else do you get strong? Right? No pain, no gain. So, agamo paino nityas. It comes and it goes. Tam pratiksha sabhata. And the next verse is going to explain why. That if you can't tolerate, you can't transcend. There's no liberation. After all, to train up for the time of death, that's the biggest toleration you're going to have. And you still have to be Dhira. You have to remember Krishna. So the mind has to be able to become absorbed in Krishna and detach from the body. And detach from everything in this world. That's what it takes. So any questions on this one? Tolerance, basic principles of Krishna. And the next verse is going to give us the value of the tolerance. Yang hinapati yantyete Purusham Purusharshabha Samadukka Sukham Dhiram Sommitadvaya Kalpate. O best among men, Arjuna, the person who is not disturbed by happiness and distress and is steady in both is certainly eligible for liberation. Report. Anyone who is steady in his determination for the advanced stage of spiritual realization and can equally tolerate the onslaughts of distress and happiness is certainly a person eligible for liberation. In the Varnashram institution, the fourth stage of life, namely the renounced order, sannyas, is a painstaking situation. But one who is serious about making his life perfect surely adopts the sannyas order of life in spite of all difficulties. The difficulties usually arise from having to sever family relationships to give up the connection of wife and children. But if anyone is able to tolerate such difficulties, surely his path to spiritual realization is complete. Similarly, in Arjuna's discharge of duties as a Kshatriya, he is advised to persevere, even if it is difficult to fight with his family members or similarly beloved persons. Lord Chaitanya took sannyas at the age of 24, and his dependents, young wife as well as old mother, had no one else to look after them. Yet for a higher cause he took sannyas and was steady in the discharge of higher duties. That is the way of achieving liberation from material bondage. And we so much need examples for this. You can see the need of what we call the acharya. Acharya has these three roles, or the three qualifications. The first one is to be very well versed in the Shastra. The second is to live by the principles of the Shastra. And then is to teach. And you can't really teach unless he has the first two qualifications. So our main acharyas, Prabhupada, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and Bhaktivinoda Thakur, showed this, this fixity of mind and purpose in the discharge of duty in spite of great difficulties. We have, of course, Prabhupada's life, how determined he was to attempt to fulfill the mission of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati despite all difficulties. I mean, in India, just to go through what he went with the Gaudiya Math, all the time, trying to work with them and the whole thing dissolving. It was a tremendous thing, Prabhupada, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur built up a tremendous organization. But because there was, the history that they didn't follow his instructions, created GBC, they tried to have a single acharya, and the whole thing disintegrated. And Prabhupada did not have that institutional support, which we have. And yet he was so determined, in spite of all the difficulties, the triple cross and having no money, no followers, and I'm just hearing, I love to hear these lectures from 74 in, I think, winter in Bombay, when he's talking about Kapila Dev teachings. It became the book, The Teachings of Lord Kapila Dev. And he's speaking about, they were struggling to get that land, against this very influential fellow, had connections with the government. He was in a newspaper. He was able to mobilize the police to come and kick the devotees off the land. They were going to demolish the temple right there. And a few courageous life members who were influential, stopped them, stopped the whole thing. And it was quite a story. Giriraj Swami is writing a book on it now. It's so much difficulty. And Prabhupada is talking about tolerance. He's speaking on the verses 3, 25, 20 to 27, which I've saw. Well, these are 8 verses, all about association with devotees, sadhu sangha. And what's the first verse and the second verse in sadhu sangha? Sadhu sangash, they call it. Tatikshava, karunika, sudidak savadehina. It says one has to transfer one's attachment from materialists to the sadhus. That's the first verse. If you want to cut off those ropes of attachment we have to this world, which keeps us coming back, In other words, understanding, first of all, the mission of human life, which is to get liberation. Okay? We go going back to God and love of God. But the first impetus is you want to get out of this prison house of birth and death and disease and all that. And the threefold miseries. Right? So how to do that? Well, it's attachments that are keeping us coming back again and again. So that attachment, you can't squelch it. If you try to repress it, it just comes out. You have to redirect to the sadhus. And what's the first quality of the sadhu? Tikshu, tolerance and mercy and a friend of all and all that. So Prabhupada is speaking how we have to tolerate all of this stuff from the government and people, the people around them are saying, stop chanting, it's a big nuisance, And Prabhupada is saying, just see how far we've come since independence. It had only been, since 47, it's like 20 to 25 years, basically. Prabhupada was in the middle of that struggle. That now, rejecting our very culture, the chanting of Hare Krishna, the teaching of Bhagavad Gita, nobody wants to come, at that time it was very difficult. So he said, what can you do? You must tolerate! He says it really loud. There's nothing to do but tolerate. There's no question of giving up. They want us to leave. We're not leaving. The deities were already there. Radha Rasa Bihari, Radha Rasa. We're not giving up, And so Prabhupada showed, and the thing is, that's a tremendous example. Just see Jesus Christ. All of Christianity grew up around his teachings and his example of being willing to die, and not flinch in the face of all this persecution. So that's what it takes. Here it says, if one can't tolerate, yanti, one who is not disturbed by all these, cold pleasure and pain, as someone dukkha sukham dhira, here's that word dhira again, who is equipoised, patient, in happiness and distress. And notice that always the happiness is also part of it. Amritadvaya, one is eligible to be liberated. And Prabhupada gives the example, the sannyasi. It's such a great example for society. Without those examples, there's no question of it. The only reason why there's a Hare Krishna movement is because there was a Prabhupada. Because he showed by example how to lead this life and how to chant and all these different things. Otherwise, it's just theoretical. So it has to be a good example. All right, any questions on these verses? These are all basic verses.
I have a question.
Yes.
Dira, in
text 13 means sober, and over here it means patience. Patient.
Yeah.
So,
Well, it's the same idea. Sober not in the sense of being not intoxicated, but being
serious?
Serious and calm, and kind of aware of things. In other words, not being whipped around by the ups and downs of this material. That's what Dira means. Sober-minded. That's a very sober-minded person. He's serious. It's not exactly the same meaning, but Dira means patient, equipoised, sober-minded, like that. Yeah, sober is, we usually think of not intoxicated, but that's not the meaning. Okay, one more. Nasato vidyate bhavo, na bhavo vidyate sataha, ubayora vidrishtontas, tvanayos tatpadarshibhi. Those who are seers of the truth have concluded that of the non-existent, the material body, there is no endurance, and of the eternal, the soul, there is no change. This they have concluded by studying the nature of both. Purport. There is no endurance of the changing body. That the body is changing at every moment by the actions and reactions of the different cells is admitted by modern science, modern medical science, and thus growth and old age are taking place in the body. But the spirit soul exists permanently, remaining the same despite all changes of the body and the mind. That is the difference between matter and spirit. By nature, the body is ever changing, and the soul is eternal. This conclusion is established by all classes of seers of the truth, both impersonalists and personalists. In the Vishnu Purana 2.12.38, it is stated that Vishnu and his abodes all have self-illuminated spiritual existence. Jyoti si Vishnu, Bhuvanani Vishnu. The words existent and non-existent refer only to spirit and matter. That is the version of all seers of the truth. This is the beginning of the instruction by the Lord to the living entities who are bewildered by the influence of ignorance. Removal of ignorance involves the reestablishment of the eternal relationship between the worshipper and the worshipable, and the consequent understanding of the difference between the part and parcel living entities and the Supreme Personality of Godhead. One can understand the nature of the Supreme by thorough study of oneself. The difference between oneself and the Supreme being understood as the relationship between the part and the whole. In the Vedanta Sutras, as well as in the Srimad Bhagavad, the Supreme has been accepted as the origin of all emanations. Such emanations are experienced by superior and inferior natural sequences. The living entities belong to the superior nature, as it will be revealed in the 7th chapter. Although there is no difference between the energy and the energetic is accepted as the supreme, and the energy or nature is accepted as the subordinate. The living entities, therefore, are always subordinate to the Supreme Lord, as in the case of the master and the servant, or the teacher and the taught. Such a clear knowledge is impossible to understand under the spell of ignorance, and to drive away such ignorance, the Lord teaches the Bhagavad Gita for the enlightenment of all living entities for all time. Now this verse introduces this idea of non-existence. Nasato vidyate bhava. Bhava here is endurance, but in the translation, the material body is said to be non-existent. And what is that? I mean, don't you exist? You feel like you exist, the body exists, right? But here the idea of the difference in existent is said to be something that eternally exists. What exists is certainly Krishna's material energy. It exists. But our idea of it, our conception of it, is what is illusory. Just like here, the body exists as Krishna's external material energy. But our understanding of it as ourself, and our understanding of the interests of the body as the interests of the self, that's illusory. That is obviously illusory, right? That's the big mistake. To think that if the body is happy, then I'm happy. That if the body is secure, then I'm secure. This is the great illusion of this world. And Krishna is speaking this to disabusers of this illusion. So this idea of this whole material life as a kind of a dream life, a big dream, that comes up again and again in the 11th canto. And it's the same Krishna speaking, the Bhagavad Gita, it's the Bhagavad Gita. So some of that is being drawn in here. What do we, the problem is that we have no idea of the spirit in our ordinary life. And so what are we going to pay attention to? This ever-changing world, is it? But the fact that it's ever-changing, we ourselves are eternal. And we're longing for eternal existence and happiness with no downside. But that cannot be in this material world, and so we're constantly frustrated. See, this is the dilemma. This is the real problem of life. And those who have no spiritual understanding at all, it doesn't make any sense. It sounds like you're just wasting your time. Why don't you get it together? Do something, make some money, do. But all of this civilization, look, it's all built on a fallacy. Nobody is happy. We just had an election. Both sides were miserable. Nobody was voting for someone with any hope. They just were voting against the other guy who they thought was worse. What is that? This is a formula for despair. And that's exactly what we have throughout this country. In spite of all this money, trillions of dollars being spent, all this money in the military, it's totally wasted. I mean, the best thing that can happen is that they don't fire those guns, right? If they start firing off in other words, the money is wasted, and if it's actually the purpose for which the money is spent comes to fruition, that's even worse. Then we all die if the bombs go off. You see how horrible thing is? It's all based on fear. Fear that, they're going to come and get us. There's more guns in this country than people. I don't own a gun. You fool, you don't own a gun. It's insane. Everyone has a gun. People are getting killed by accident all the time. It's all based on this dream world that we're actually this body and that we have to try to protect it at all costs, But we just learned we're not the body. Why not work for the benefit of your actual self? Natevadu swartakatimi Vishnu. Prabhupada quoted this verse 1,000,000 times. Prahlad Maharaj said. Those people who are totally absorbed in the externals, uncontrolled senses, trying to enjoy this world, chewing the chewed again and again and again, life after life, they don't know that Vishnu is the actual goal. They don't know that they're part and parcel of God. Right? And therefore, where do they put their attention? Externally. Durashe bahirartha mind. Bahirartha means external goals. The mind's always absorbed in these external goals. Impossible to achieve. Durashe. And they're encouraged in this ignorance by other blind people. You see the problem? And everybody stays bound up. The so-called teachers and the taught and the next generation, everyone stays bound up tightly by the modes of nature. There's a tragic situation. Krishna can see it clearly. Out of compassion, he comes down, speaks the Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna, and through Arjuna he speaks to all of us. Why? Because he cares. He's the eternal Surya. He never stops caring for us. Our problem is we've forgotten him and stopped caring for him. The whole purpose of the bhakti process is to awaken that natural caring for Krishna. Once that's awakened, all of this dream ends. Nightmare. You see, that's the reality. But when you're through the looking glass of this material world, the reality looks like a dream. But actually, this is the dream. This is the craziness. So nasate vidite bhavo na bhavo vidite. The seers of the truth, this is the Tattvadarshini, this word comes up again in the 4th chapter. Those who have seen the truth with this vision of eternity, they can see that of the asat, there's no real existence. Of this body, this world, it's just a phantasmagoria. But of the sat, there's no non-existence. There is simply eternity. Now, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. We'll begin text 17 tomorrow. sorry, we should have stopped here. Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada ki jai. ISKCON Bhagavad Foundation Church, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Jai Vishnupada Paramahamsa Vajika Church, Ashtotar, Sri Srimad Divine Grace, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur ki jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda ki jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki jai. Prem to the Holy Krishna Chaitanya Devaman Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda ki jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gaur Gopinath Shyam Radhakund Giri Govardhan ki jai. Vrindavan Dham ki jai. Navadip Mayapur Dham ki jai. Jagannath Puri Dham ki jai. Ganga Mehi ki jai. Yamuna Mehi ki jai. Tulsi Devi ki jai. Bhakti Devi ki jai. Shri Harinath Sankirtan ki jai. Transcendental Book Distribution ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Samaveta Bhaktivinoda ki jai. All glory to the Son of the devotees. All glory to the Son of the devotees. All glory to the Son of the devotees. All glory to Guru and Brahma. All glory to Guru. Namaste Narasimhaya. Namaste Narasimhaya. Ballara Prashadam? Look at all those coconut balls. Anything? Got a lot of this. One sweet? Maybe that's nasty there. Get some of that. A little of this. Breakfast. Butterboard. Good. Maybe a little salty. How about a sweet? That should be sweet.
Is it a, you can't come from
Well, I went now.
we're going to his
Oh,
The one up there, the last thing. is-
okay. Well, thanks for letting me know. I miss you. You're next.
Yes, I had some earlier, so I fixed them.
Ah, they must be good. One or two. We have many. And oh, yes, sir. Leave a little for me. This side?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes? Okay. Do it. Yeah? Good. Yeah, surrender. Go to waste. One? One? Small one. Zachary.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Grab a little bit of something.
Did it want to play?
Yeah.
There you go. Is that little enough?
Yeah, I just want to.
One for you, okay, getting most of you. Small one, or just a leaf? How about leaf?
Yes.
All right, let's do the leaves. There we go.
Thank you.
Sir, you're next. We got many of these for you? Are we good? Cup.
Is it normal?
Yes, sir. No subject? As much as you want? How about some puris? Plenty of puris. I may have a sweetie for you. Are we good? Rice.